Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back with another live stream of the Social Change Career Podcast. Here today with David Timis. It's season 15, episode 5. We're going to be talking about navigating the world of work in the age of AI, which is one of the biggest questions on the mind of everybody from policymakers to professors to students to employers. So it's a really critical topic. For people who have not joined us previously, this podcast is live streamed on YouTube and LinkedIn, and we deeply enjoy hearing from people. Feel free to put in the comments where you're watching from, your questions, your comments, your favorite resources, and we'll try to weave those into the conversation. This will be converted to an audio podcast by the end of the week, if not sooner. You can find it on PCDN Global/listen or any major podcasting platform. 3 quick requests. Please follow David on LinkedIn and also Generation. If you want to just stay informed, updated, and all sorts of interesting insights, please follow PCDN on LinkedIn. And then whether it's this podcast or any podcast you listen to, the number one thing you can do for a podcaster is take 15 seconds and rate it and share it. Because podcasting for most of us is a labor of love. So whether it's on Apple or Spotify or any podcasting platform, please consider doing that. So David is a global communications and public affairs manager at Generation, one of the largest skilling and employment nonprofits in the world, where he oversees the organization's storytelling globally and advocacy work at a EU level. He speaks regularly about AI and the risks and opportunities it presents for people, businesses, and society. He is also the community champion for the Benelux and France region and co-lead for the 2025 edition of Shape Europe and Eurasia, and Longevity Economy Task Force member within the Global Shapers community, part of the World Economic Forum. He previously led the EU civics outreach efforts at Google, both the 2019 and 2024 EU elections, and before that, he was a UN youth delegate representing Romania. He's worked in the public, private, and third sector with L'Oreal, Mars, Burson, Chatham House, and the Council of Europe. With a career at the crossroads of tech, workforce development policy, he has been shaping conversations on skilling, education, AI governance, and digital transformation. And David and I met in a Blue Dot course on AI strategy. And if you don't know Blue Dot, just go to bluedot.org. They're not paying us to say this, but it's a wonderful platform for upskilling on AI, whether it's on economics, bio risks, strategy, governance. So I've taken courses and facilitated for them. So please check it, just go to bluedot.org. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia, and David is in Brussels, which is a wonderful city. I assume the weather is much nicer here than in Brussels right now. So David, thank you so much for taking time to share your experience, your wisdom, your questions. And just to start off with, I mean, you've already done a lot in your career. And if you think back to your younger years, whatever that means to you, did you aspire to work in policy and impact and communications? Like, what did you envision as your possible career paths? And how in the world did you wind up at this intersection of AI, policy, governance?
Yeah, thank you, Craig. Thank you for having me. And again, it's been great for us to meet during the AGI strategy course organized by the lovely folks at the Blue Dot Impact team. So just to set the context, it's a funny question because I actually, given my outside of sort of AI work, I'm also a career coach. I often nudge people to reflect on exactly this question, and I'm doing this by also doing it myself previously. Of course, I practice what I preach. So I have a very clear answer, actually, meaning that when I was probably until the age of 10, I was really fascinated with two potential professions, neither of which I have pursued, probably luckily for both myself and humanity. One was to be a motorbike, a pro motorbike driver, pilot, whatever you call it, to race in MotoGP. Like I think what was his name? De Rossi, the famous Italian MotoGP rider back in the days. And then my second option was to be an astronaut. Both I realized, lucky enough, with good time, that probably I like both because of the helmets. So post my sort of primary school years, so as soon as I basically started the secondary school and then later on high school, I gravitated from funky helmets to interesting briefcases because I became fascinated with the briefcases I've seen in movies that diplomats are carrying. So I wanted to
Mhm.
become a diplomat, and that actually path I haven't strayed that much from, because as much as I'm not officially a diplomat, I am working closely with diplomats in the sort of a public policy and governance space. So yeah, nothing have prepared me, at least not before the age of 18, for what I'm doing now. And all my previous sort of career options were very far fetched in many ways, especially my early on. So yeah, it's never bad to dream, but also it's good to realize when is the time to wake up and think where actually your strengths are and what you can realistically pursue.
Although there still is time. I mean,
Of
I
course.
used to ski. I used to ski race. I was decent at that. Not great, but just in high school. But I did have a motorbike as a teenager, and I did not dream about becoming a motorcycle racer. But I realized it was not for me after I was going up a hill and flipped over and it landed on me. I was not a good motorbiker. Um, but there's still time to become an astronaut or any of those things. So to talk about diplomat. So how did you start? I mean, whether it was carrying a briefcase or learning multiple languages. So how in the world did you get from realizing maybe at least currently being an astronaut or a GP motorcycle racer was not going to be the next step in your career? So was it picking the right major in university? Was it the right mentors? Did you do, young UN model UN? Like how did you start moving towards the briefcase career? Or briefcase is kind of a boring metaphor. So let's
Yeah.
say the what's a metaphor that you would use, or like an analogy around kind of the work you do?
Yeah, I intentionally focused on sort of a sillier analogies with the helmets, and then the briefcase, obviously for the purpose of showing how at the time I was literally like many other young people under 18, really picking things up from movies and not necessarily knowing why I want to pursue this potential career or not. With diplomat, as I said, there were some legs to the story, meaning that beyond the briefcase, I always had the passion for foreign languages. I was lucky enough for my father to work early on in my life. I was seeing him work as a translator and interpreter for the Red Cross, and then the Norwegian Red Cross, which meant that through my sort of formative years, I've seen people cross our doorstep in Romania, my home country, that were from all over the world. So I had to pick up English fairly quickly, and I've learned it both from my father, from school, from American movies, and then later on in through formal education. But I always had an interest in foreign languages, and my grandmother, from my father's side, was also a language teacher. So she taught French, Russian, and I think a couple of other languages, because she was, I think, a polyglot. So this interest in languages was also something that sort of nudged me to pursue potentially a career in diplomacy or in international affairs. And incidentally, life had other plans, because whilst I wanted to study abroad, and I knew I will definitely go somewhere outside of Romania to pursue my higher education, out of the 10 universities I applied for, luckily I got accepted in, I think, all 10 out of 10, or 9 out of 10, or anyways, the majority. But the one I really wanted to go to the most, Glasgow University, was the only one for which, even though I applied with the similar personal statement, which was focused on my passion for languages and the application for something that is along the lines of a European studies / IR or international relations degree, Glasgow at the time didn't have that program. So I ended up, they accepted me with the same motivation letter, but they told me, hey, we don't have European studies and modern languages as a degree, but we have a mix of things that you can choose, because little did I know at the time, Glasgow University had and still has a system that has actually inspired the American system, because it was actually a Scottish educator that went to the US to build the foundation of the now US educational system, to be based on majors and minors. So basically, I was able to choose literally whilst I arrived in Glasgow with my academic advisor. Yes, a modern language, and I've chosen German for my first year, which I then changed to French. Yes, something to do with the part of diplomacy which is to do with debate. So I studied philosophy, and I ended up picking something much more pragmatic, as my dad would have said, which is business. So I kind of strayed away from my degree from the career of a sort of, or what the educational background of a diplomat is, but I never lost hope. And all this sort of a detour I've taken you and the listeners on, to say that as soon as I graduated, and I did work in two large multinationals, initially Mars Inc. in the UK and then L'Oreal in Romania in their marketing department to kind of practice what my major was, which was in business with the focus on marketing, the topic I wrote my dissertation in. And this is an important element we'll get back to in the story later on, the topic of the dissertation. But after 2 years in marketing, I kind of realized, especially in the FMCG sector, the fast moving consumer goods sector, it's not fast enough for me at the time. I was in my early 20s. And I got an opportunity to work in a large VC, which you will not see in my CV or anywhere because I didn't stay that long. I was not there for as like not even I think 2 or 3 months. But it was at the time a great opportunity to work with what is still up to this day probably the main venture capital business in Romania with one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs and investors at the time. And in those 2 or 3 months I worked with him, I got the opportunity out of a sudden to be Romania's United Nations youth delegate, which is my only stint in officially diplomacy because I was even given the choice of choosing between updating my passport to a diplomatic passport for that 1 year. So all this to say is that after having that sort of initial diplomatic vision, ending up studying still languages and philosophy, which I see it connected to the diplomatic world, I strayed away by going into business before actually seeing how diplomacy is done on the biggest stage, which is the UN. So I'll stop here.
Okay. So a couple of just comments and sharing. So I lived in Europe many years, and it seems like similar to you. I did junior abroad in Hungary, in Pécs, Hungary. I've been to Romania many times. A beautiful country, although it's been a long time since I've been back. But studying abroad changed my life in such a powerful and incredible way. And I'd studied French for years, and I was convinced I could not learn a word of the language, to speak. And then when I went to Paris the first time, I couldn't even ask where the bathroom was. I could understand, but spending 3 years in Hungary and getting, let's say not fluent, but very proficient in the language just opened up my world. And of course, all the work I did there. So, and just a couple of resources I would say. So I was a Fulbright fellow for 2 years in Hungary. So if you're looking to study, from the US or outside the US, Fulbright, or there's chevening, or I did my master's at Central European University back before it was kicked out of, I did it in Prague, but it's been kicked out of Hungary. But there's so many amazing fellowships and scholarships, and if you can find there's a lot of institutions that will, there's Erasmus, but there's so many programs that will help support young people in kind of intercultural exchange development, and I also do angel investing. I'm not a VC investor, but just interesting stuff. And which city or town are you from in Romania?
I'm from Târgu Mureș, which in Hungarian, since you are a speaker, it's
Kolozsvár.
Marosvásárhely.
Marosvásárhely. I've been to, I think I've been
Transylvania.
there. Yeah. No, I mean, one other comment, then we'll get back to the question. So, I mean, I've always been interested in the world, but it's funny. Before I moved to Hungary, I didn't realize Transylvania was a real place. It was like more this like fantasy place. It's weird, but obviously,
Yes,
I've been there.
some people from the States still confuse it with Pennsylvania. No, it's a place of it's Transylvania.
Yes, no, it's beautiful. So how many languages? So just a related topic. How many languages are you competent in? And for people who want to learn languages, and just to jump into two questions. One is any advice, since you come from a family of, let's say, polyglots or linguists, and then just to start jumping into AI. How do you see AI affecting either interpretation, translation, or language learning?
Yeah, it's a great question because I always think I could have done much more, and this is one thing that unfortunately my grandma is no longer with us, the polyglot grandma. So she never managed to teach me Russian and French, which could have come in handy. French I managed to learn by myself because it's much easier to do so as a native Romanian speaker, because Romanian is a Latin language, but Russian was definitely more difficult. And the more languages you speak, the merrier. Hungarian also, I sort of mastered the basics, but I don't go beyond that. So leaving these out, I'm fluent in obviously my native language of Romanian, English, which by now is more or less native, French, and fluent French, and a beginner German. So I did study German both in high school for a year or two, and then in university, as I mentioned, in my first year at Glasgow, I chose German. And then I did my Erasmus in Strasbourg, which is still, given its history, French and German speaking, especially if you speak with somebody in sort of in their second part of their life who've been there for longer. They still can tackle your question both in German and in French. So yeah, I wouldn't call myself a polyglot by far, especially not living in Brussels where everybody speaks more languages. My partner is Armenian and she speaks more languages than I do. But to go back to the last part of your question, I also sort of realized that there's, other than being able to know the basics in many languages, which I know from even sort of the likes of a few phrases in Japanese, in Chinese, in Arabic, which would already give you or give your counterpart in the conversation, the nice feeling that you've put in the interest and effort to learn a few of those words. Anyways, most people nowadays would switch to English or French, especially in my sort of a line of work or circle. So I think with learning languages, I focus nowadays on making sure I know a bit from a lot of languages to make me break the ice better with my counterparts, regardless of who they might be. Whilst actually fully studying a language, I've realized that, even now, if I would like to perfect my German, the effort required is just not worth it for me personally, given all the other things I'm interested in. Also because of, or thanks to AI, depends how you see it. Definitely when it comes to translation. When it comes to translation, we've already seen even pre-generative AI, pre-ChatGPT, that the DeepLs of the world and Google Translates are getting much better. And for a lot of the non-official translation work, we don't need to pay a translator anymore. For interpretation is different, but if you look at the latest launches for both Apple, their latest AirPods, but also Google, even more recently, the age of the interpretation in a non very sort of a public sector capacity, because that will still remain. Obviously, you don't want a peace deal to be negotiated between any world leader with only earpods in their ears and no proper interpreter to make sure the cultural nuances are also taken into account. But for a lot of the other interpretation happening in a more sort of a non-official capacity, let's say, I think AI will take a big chunk of that in the future.
And for people who are either starting to learn a second or third or fourth language or want to learn, not that you're endorsing any platforms, but have you experimented with any of these around particular? I mean, one is just to put in a text and say, hey, translate this so I can share it with someone else, maybe whether it's at professional level or just good enough. But for language learning, I keep coming across apps. I haven't had time to, I've played around. I use AI a lot and teach on it. So I played around with some tools and I'll be like, I lived in Bosnia, so my Hungarian is like, now Spanish is my dominant language, but I used to speak Bosnian decent. So I played around with some of the apps and I'll start a conversation in Spanish and then switch to Bosnian. It's interesting to see how quickly they adapt. But just have you found any preferred platforms that you have experimented or heard about for people to improve their language abilities?
Yeah, so very importantly, because I recently had this conversation just I think a week ago with a group of friends who also shared the same experience you had, and all of us have had who've studied languages. If you don't practice them, you can actually lose a lot of what you've learned quite quickly. Similar, yeah, not going to the gym, you lose muscle mass fairly quickly. It's just how our human bodies and minds work. So for me, the main goal is again to take you a few steps back. Is follow the incentives. What's your incentive to learn that language? Is it just to have a bit of fun? If your agenda allows it, good luck. But there's very slim chances you'll actually keep it up unless you're very interested in languages that maybe even goes beyond the interest I had back in the day. And I do know people who are just genuinely interested in learning languages. However, the most long-term language learners I've met are people who've learned it for two different reasons. One is work-related, because your job requires it, and then you're in an environment in which you can practice it every day. Second, and maybe even more powerful, your partner speaks it, and she or he can teach you, and you have obviously a person you can engage with on a daily basis. For all other purposes, I don't see any app doing any magic work for you, and it's just a matter of being really dedicated to practice it, because otherwise you're going to lose it. However, if I'm to push myself for an app to give you the basics, is definitely still Duolingo is great to give you a sort of common phrases, but definitely not to learn a language. But then now I've experimenting a bit, not necessarily with learning languages, but with learning other subjects, with interacting with the likes of Google Gemini, not ChatGPT because I'm not a big fan. Happy to clarify why, but Google Gemini and Perplexity both have been really good in helping me learn different subjects, especially if you activate on Google Gemini the career coaching mode, because there is a career or the coaching mode, not necessarily career coaching. And all this to say that actually the most powerful tool is actually not any digital tool, is a human tool. It's becoming or having a language partner. So this idea of most languages are being learned again for conversation, unless they're for again work-related reasons. And for conversation, no app will do the job of another human being over coffee, giving you live feedback on jargon, pronunciation, and things that again with apps they're not there yet. So again, never disregard still the face-to-face, human-to-human way to learn a language.
Yes, I would just agree. So when I started to learn Hungarian, I mean, I learned a little bit in university, but when I went overseas, I developed my own theory of language learning, and I call it the furniture theory. That, I mean, there's two parts to it. One is like I have made lots of Hungarian friends, and I would sit at parties, and I could not understand anything, or like maybe it was like every 20th word, then every 10th word. I felt like a piece of furniture because people acknowledged that I was there, but I couldn't. If it was an English conversation, but it was Hungarian, I couldn't participate. But eventually, like I recognized enough words, and then there's that magical moment when it's like I knew I always heard the word, but I didn't know what it was, and like and there is this joy in just becoming more aware, and playing with the structure of language. And I agree that apps are useful, but they're so far not a substitute. So getting back to, so you were Romanian youth representative to United Nations, and then have you always been interested in technology? Or were you a coder? How did you start building up, whether it's pre-generative, machine learning or generative AI? Like, where did this expertise come from? Formal studies, training, mentors, and how did you start getting on this path of policy AI?
Yeah, so the path is actually not policy and AI, or at least that's where I ended up working tangentially, because it's not just the policy front, as I'll clarify in a second. For me, the common denominator was, so again, I'm now working at the intersection of three topics more broadly: technology slash AI, or AI in particular, since it's the technology to work in. Second is workforce development slash employment. And then the third is the policy governance side. And for me, the key to get me to where I am today was actually my interest and passion, I would say, for workforce development and employment. So I can remember even in high school days that whenever I was learning a new skill that would make my life as a student easier, be it a productivity hack or a time management hack, I would share with my students. I would organize a training pro bono to share it with my fellow colleagues. And I've carried on this practice for university, becoming a trainer, both informally for, again, for friends and colleagues in different classes, but also formally for the university. I've been delivering trainings there. I was a campus tour. So this idea of sharing knowledge and knowing how to translate, in some cases, complex topics to the understanding of a general public was always something that I had in me, but also a skill I fine-tuned. This has led me to do the work I've done at the UN, because as a youth delegate, I was a youth delegate at the UN in probably the one of the more important years to be a youth delegate, because it was a 1-year mandate. It was the year when the SDGs were adopted in New York. So it was now what, 2015, if I'm not mistaken. And it was the year that the whole 2030 agenda was set up. So my role was, together with my colleague, because we're for each country two individuals representing the voices of young people, our role was to educate and raise awareness amongst youth in our country, the millions of Romanians who, many of them, have never even heard of the UN, even less so of the SDGs. What are the SDGs? Sustainable Development Goals. How are these discussions happening in New York at the UN impacting you as a citizen of Romanian city or village X or Y? So it was a lot of advocacy and education work and training work. Then this is what actually led me to work at Google, because whilst I finished my mandate, or I was towards the end of my mandate, Google Romania was just launching their, by now I would say, a legendary program, Atelierul Digital, or the Digital Skills Workshop in English, which was part of the broader Grow with Google program that Google has launched globally, which is one of the biggest digital skilling programs that I think any company has led or started in I think the last decade or so. And the goal was to train people in digital skills, everything from digital marketing, which is obviously the bread and butter of Google, and later on AI and other skills, which are quote unquote digital skills. So I moved from the UN training people and advocating for SDGs to training people in digital skills, and from being in the UN role very much a front end person, I was, together with my colleague, delivering the message and the trainings and so on. At Google, I was giving a budget, a team to actually manage a group of professionals doing these trainings. I was in the back end. Then again, my 3 years at Google wrapped up with the chance to actually go to work in Belgium to help the EU policy team train politicians in digital skills. So again, I moved from the back end of managing a program, the Digital Skills Workshop, to being the spearhead, the trainer of an elections civics outreach program that Google and other tech companies had to make sure that politicians across the EU, and not only, are well versed in digital tools and also know how to stay safe online, especially around elections when it's obviously a high time for all sorts of attacks that they could be a victim of. So again, I kept moving from this sort of a back end to front end of being either a manager of trainers or a trainer myself, whilst at the same time, whilst in my jobs I was moving from back end to front end, every other year. In my spare time, I was continuing to do my own trainings in different topics, from building an online presence to networking to everything. I thought I reached a good enough level to share the knowledge with others. I was delivering trainings for individuals and companies, and also increasingly more so as of 2019. So before it was cool, I started talking about exactly the topic that is the title of this session, which is navigating the world of work. Yes, in the age of AI, because AI is not new. It's generative AI, which is the new angle to it, but AI has been with us for much longer. And being at Google, I was able to get a front row seat to see how it's a topic for a few tech companies that now it's becoming a topic that the entire world is in the know and cares about much more deeply.
Wonderful. So we're starting to get questions coming in. I'll bring them in, and everyone who's watching, please let us know where you're watching from. And to everyone in Pakistan, we'll bring in your question. I'll ask one more. And feel free to share your comments and resources. So just one question. We'll come back, after some questions come from the audience. So I've also done a lot of work on workforce development, and I was a university tour guide and admission, so a lot of interesting similarities. And so the question is, when you give talks on this topic, let's say you're talking to young professionals entering university or thinking about university, they might not choose to go. What are your key points? And this is a big question around the future of work and AI. So is it, you could talk about it first from the upskilling perspective, or are there going to be are there still going to be stable permanent jobs or semi-permanent jobs? There's going to be gigification. So we'll get much deeper, but what are some of your key insights, particularly for young professionals, around, hey, generative AI is rapidly changing the nature of work and employment, and policy is not updating fast enough? So just some thoughts for young professionals.
Yeah, it's often young professionals between the ages of 18 to 35, actually. So not just young, but also sort of towards the later part of their being young professionals. So I speak a lot with them, both through the conferences I speak at, but also individually as a career coach, as a mentor. And I must say, especially for those who are young graduates, I definitely don't envy their position. I empathize with their difficulty in finding work in general. I think there was a time during the pandemic where people started to reflect, and people of all ages and backgrounds, of how can work be a bit more meaningful, and that was great. But I think now we're in a time in which meaning is definitely a huge bonus to have, but most people are just looking for work that pays and that is decent enough to keep them at it, and meaning is just a sort of a side thought given how difficult the labor market and how volatile it is. So given this context, that I definitely understand the challenges, and working in AI and seeing how disruptive it can be, I'm also worried myself. I also mentioned to the young people I speak with that they are still in a very good position to benefit from this wave, because at the end of the day, we're all kind of starting from scratch. Nobody was born knowing how to use generative AI. It all kind of started 3 years ago. The only people which were in an advantage were the developers, the engineers who are behind the LLMs themselves, which is a handful of people, which we know how high of a wage they can command. But that's a really small percentage of the population. For everybody else, it's something that's been with us for 3 years. So anybody who's young listening, who has not yet explored all of the AI tools that are available from at least the leading edge providers. So I would mention OpenAI with ChatGPT, Google Gemini, Anthropic Claude, and Microsoft Copilot being the four more well-known and used mainstream models, let's call them like this, that are generally usable and useful. If you haven't done so already, do it, because if you become proficient in AI, whilst it's a very difficult labor market where there's not a lot of hiring happening, there's definitely an interest in people who have AI skills. I can tell you that. So that is something that actually young people could be in a good position, for to leverage, because they've, if not being born with it, they definitely grew up with it and maybe even finished their academic studies whilst these technologies were just being launched. So they've explored with them more than people who maybe have been in the job for 10, 15 years, who are more resistant to change. And then the second element, which will remain the same, is that, and that's maybe one worry for or one extra worry for people who are not yet in employment, given the situation of the labor market, is that people's skills will also command the premium, because I see this AI advantage being for the next maybe 2 to 5 years, of people who know AI being seen as this sort of even a sort of a generalist who knows AI can be very valuable now. But now, as more and more people learn how to use these tools, because it's not rocket science, you just need language at the end of the day and a bit of common sense of prompt engineering training to use them wisely and also ethically. As more and more people will use them, being AI savvy will not be the differentiate factor. What will be the differentiating factor will be who's the best communicator, the best collaborator, the person who knows how to set context both for an AI tool but also for their team, who knows how to delegate work as well as rolling up your sleeves and doing the work yourselves. So those skills, which I would call core skills or people skills, will remain virtually the same as in the past, as in pre-generative AI years. So doubling down on both people skills and AI would be a safe bet for the next 2 to 5 years. And last but not least, because I always sort of leave it as a last point, but it's equally important, is if there's no job for you in the foreseeable future for different reasons, and you have some sort of support from family, friends, some sort of safety net, don't waste time, volunteer. Because volunteering has been for me one of the best ways to learn the people skills I keep mentioning. I manage more people as a volunteer than I've done in my jobs in the past. And before I managed trainers at Google, or now at Generation, before I manage people, I've worked and managed with much more people in my volunteering career, so to say. So that's a great way for young people to learn some skills that otherwise they will need to wait a few more years whilst they're on the job to learn. And I'll stop
Okay.
here, but plenty of more to say on this.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. And I would add just one thing again: volunteering has been amazing for me, but also fellowships. So a lot of people think it's either paid employment or volunteering, and I've been fortunate, not because I'm smart, but I had good mentors years ago who were like, apply for fellowships. So there are so many fellowships or scholarships that will fund either short-term or long-term work, or UNV, or VSO. So I'll bring in a question from Tareem in Pakistan. Can micro-credential programs bridge the gap of AI skills? And can you give some examples of micro-credential programs already available? And I'll add like another part. So obviously universities, in my opinion, as a professor full-time for 10 years, still teach. I find most universities are not adapting. Let's say, I feel like they're teaching for the jobs of the 21st century and the skills. And some are adapting. I'd say like Minerva University, or some are really at the cutting edge. But so there is this increasing focus. Is it all micro credentialing? So just both on her question, any thoughts about AI skills and micro credentials, but also in general, the value of a university degree versus a micro credential or do it yourself or certificates?
Yeah, so to start with the latter part, with the more sort of general question, the value of universities is still there if you're talking about the tier one universities,
Right.
the Harvard, Stanford, Oxford, or Cambridge of the world, or INSEAD, to ruffle any feathers in France, or AGC. These are still very, very sought after universities, because you're not paying for the knowledge, since knowledge is universally now available for people as long as they have an internet connection and maybe a laptop or a phone. You're paying for the network you get, which is incredible in any of these universities and others, and the brand of the universities, which still opens doors, especially for entry level workers. So these are things for which top level universities, tier one universities, I call them, will still command the premium. The let's call them tier three universities, who are maybe free or cheap, and they're maybe lesser known, will still be able to attract students simply because it's just ingrained in our psyche, and it's been already happening for more than just one generation, of the value that we still perceive from a traditional university degree. And as long as it's free, and again, even if it's maybe a less of a powerful brand and maybe not as strong of a network as an Ivy League school, you would still go and hopefully get your bachelor's and even master's degree. What is being particularly at risk is tier two universities, which are universities that are not as strongly sort of ranked as the Ivy Leagues. They're still not cheap, or not as cheap as the tier three ones. They will struggle to attract talent, because it's almost like the same impact that AI is having already to some degree, and will have even more in the coming years on not just entry-level work, but middle management, which I'm happy to talk about later on. Same with universities. It's not so disruptive for executives, since they will still keep the job. Entry-level workers are suffering, but not because AI is taking their jobs necessarily. It's more of a so it's not they're not being fired from the job. They're just less openings. Same with universities. The universities that will be most impacted, or the larger part, which is the tier two universities, which most universities would be probably falling in this bucket. So I see the incredible opportunity that universities now have to leverage this transformation. If maybe with COVID it was a bit more difficult for them to step up to it, or for many of them, given how overnight the change has seemed. Hopefully now with AI they will be able to step up to the opportunity and go from what you rightly described, a 20th century teaching model and assessment model, to a 21st century one. And I'll leave it here, but again, happy to unpack this later on. And maybe just one last note on education, which I'm particularly feeling frustrated about. And unfortunately, it's actually happening, or it has happened in Belgium. As much as rectors from different universities here in the country I call now home have spoken in favor of AI being used, there's been a coalition of professors in some of these universities have been pushing back quite strongly. And for me, that was quite sad to see, because I think professors have this key role to play in preparing the next generation for whatever the new technology is, or whatever the new market realities are. And if you try to ban a technology that is already out, it's not, you're not going to be able to put the genie back in the bottle. By not allowing your students to use it and not teaching them how to use it more effectively and ethically, you're missing out on the opportunity that you have as a professor, as a teacher. So this is happening, unfortunately, in many universities that I'm hearing and reading about, of, in some cases, the leadership pushing it, like you would see an executive pushing it in a company, but then for reasons which are to do in many cases with the way it's been communicated, or the way that the professors or the employees have been or not been trained, the people who actually have to use it or teach others how to use it are the ones pushing back the hardest. And that's where I think we, as experts in the space, have to play a key role to bring the two sides at the discussion table and to find common ground. And this, to give now some time for the actual question, or for the micro-credential related question. Yes, we see in tech companies, which are usually leading the ground when it comes to many changes in society, and we see in hiring one, for instance, of skills-based hiring, of more and more tech companies, and not only hiring people based on skills, not degrees. More and more of them accepting high schoolers as long as they know how to code, even vibe code. There's been cases in all of the big Mac 7 tech companies, and not only. And increasingly more so also with micro credentials that are being obtained either for online courses that even Google or Microsoft or AWS offer, but also for micro credentials offered by other entities, including entities like sort of training providers like Generation and others. So yes, micro credentials are one way to gain the skills. And if you'd like to learn about more courses that you can do online about AI more broadly and how to use it, or AI and work and the economy, please visit my LinkedIn profile, because I actually took the effort of tracking down all the certifications I've done. So if you scroll down the profile, and I've done probably 20 or 25, if I'm not mistaken, over the past 3 years, online, most of them free, certification in either just, again, how to use generative AI or how to use it in a specific sector. So check my profile for examples that are concrete for micro-credential programs.
Thank you so much, Intervene. Thanks for your question. Please, we have about 20 minutes. Feel free, other people, to share comments, questions. So I want to jump into something, and again, check LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com. I would say 10 years ago, when LinkedIn acquired Lynda for about $1 billion, it was kind of seen as obscure. And now, particularly, like, I've done multiple, courses on LinkedIn, not just one-off, like 8-hour courses on AI, all sorts of things. So again, sometimes it's worth spending money on a certificate or degree, but there's also a lot you can do. And if you do one course on AI, who cares? But if you're doing a series of courses on AI, data visualization or AI for management, and you show consistency, those can be extremely valuable. But to get to something, let's say, not everyone should go to university, not everyone should go to grad school, but let's say someone's done university and they're thinking about grad school. Again, obviously it depends on country, job market, skills, their personal, financial situation, if they have funding. But when you talk to, and again, everyone has to make their own decisions, so you're not giving, legal or financial, but when you talk to people and they're saying, like, should I go to grad school, or should I just upskill on my own, particularly in this age of generative AI. And we've talked about tier one, tier two, and tier three universities, but what are the types of questions or the data points that you like to give people to help them make a decision? Is it worth, if you're lucky to have a scholarship, that's one thing. But if you have to pay, what are some thoughts you encourage people to think about?
Yeah, so I strongly believe in free education. I was both privileged enough and worked hard enough to not have to pay for any of the two masters I have and bachelor, thanks to again hard work and being privileged enough to live in Europe. And the European Union has provided me with the Erasmus grant I benefited from, and then the Scottish government with the Scottish government grant that it provided all EU citizens, whilst the UK was still part of the EU. So I leverage always all these opportunities, and they're still out there. And as you already mentioned, a few programs like the Achieving Scholar Program for I think UK or English speaking scholars, or the American one. What was it? The you just mentioned it, and I have
The
a lapsus
Fulbright.
now.
I mean, there's
Fulbright,
the
exactly.
Fulbright,
The
but there's lots
Fulbright.
of others.
Fulbright. So there's plenty of such programs, and that's why I'm not, especially, I would not pay the full amount of what you'd be asked to pay for one of the Ivy Leagues in the US or even in Europe, full price, unless obviously you or your family can afford it. But I'm just encouraging people to not be put down by the price itself, because all of these universities have incredible programs that support either students who are in need or students who are incredibly gifted at whatever they do, be it the intellectual capacity or maybe they're great athletes. And then there's also this option that you rightfully mentioned, which is fellowships. For me, fellowships are not to replace a bachelor's or a master's. I still recommend people to still pursue, again, if they find a way to pursue very cheaply or for free a decent bachelor and a decent master, because there's many benefits you can gain from just being in the right environment with like-minded people and professors to guide you. So I still believe in the power of formal education, and nothing stops you from doing micro credentials on the side of you being fully enrolled in university. That's down to you and how ambitious you are and how motivated you are. Fellowships for me have been the best replacements for executive programs, because after you've done, like myself, a couple of masters, your only other options are executive programs or PhDs. And whilst I think PhDs are a better option for people who want to be more embedded in the academic system, let's say, or to dive really deeply in an area of research, which was not the case for me, executive programs are extremely expensive. And if you work in an NGO sector like myself, it's definitely not the NGO will be able to support you to pay the entire amount of an executive program. However, fellowships, in my view, are basically an executive program. You're surrounded by incredibly gifted individuals in your area of interest, depending on the fellowship. It's fully subsidized in most cases, and it's not going to disturb you from your full-time academics or your work, because most of these fellowships are put together for people who are already employed or who are fully engaged in their studies. So fellowships have been for me the greatest way to learn post my formal education. I highly recommend people to pursue fellowships. But again, to answer your question, I still believe in formal education. I would not replace it with micro credentials. For me, micro credentials will be on top of formal education. However, if you cannot afford formal education, or you, for different reasons, cannot pursue it, definitely doing a micro credential and a fellowship could bridge that gap of credentials that you still need, unfortunately, for the labor market.
Okay, thank you so much. And just, I did my master's at Central European University. I had a fellowship, Fulbright. I had a fellowship. PCDM, we share a lot. ProFellow is one of the best databases in the world for fellowships. A friend runs it. And then, of course, a lot of major governments, from China to Turkey to Germany, the DAD scholarship. So, and I'll just say one thing. I've been rejected from a lot of fellowships. I've advised hundreds of people on fellowships. And the number one thing is understand what the funder or donor wants and match your skills and experience to their goals without selling out, and be prepared to get rejected. I still apply for things. Like, I've had professional fellowships. I still get rejected, even though I know how to do it. So it's like, one quick story. I had a student. I was a fellowship advisor volunteer at Georgetown for 8 years for a fellowship that I had, and helped maybe 100 people got the fellowship. And one student came to me crying. She's like, not crying, but she was very frustrated. She's like, I didn't get accepted. She was on the wait, no, this is actually the beginning. So we did like 5 drafts of her application. I just saying, this is not good. And she was like crying with me. She's like, you stink. I mean, not in those language, but she did get the fellowship. So it's like, it's not like, even with AI, you can't just do it overnight. Be prepared to be rejected and learn how to do it better. Um, so,
And it's
so
not,
a
in many
question.
cases, it's not
Good.
you. Just to interrupt, sorry, but in so I strongly recommend this for people in any line of work, interest, or applying for university fellowships or jobs. Never be discouraged by even many applications that you made, or even by lack of feedback, which is common the case for many applications for both competitive fellowships or jobs, because in many cases it's actually not even you. It's either a quota you're not meeting in terms of gender, geography. It's either exactly a skill set that you might have that might not be relevant for that cohort. So for me, from indeed, as you rightfully mentioned, I've been rejected 100 times to get the, I don't know, 10, 15 fellowships I've done over the 10 years, which you can also find on my LinkedIn profile for those who want to do fellowships. I've listed them all there by year. So yeah, never get discouraged, because for all of us who've done a few, it's been definitely a struggle. It hasn't been easy, and it's been only through trial and error that we've fine tuned our application and
Yep.
just made luck work for us, because we're not every day
Yep.
lucky with a good application,
Yep.
but sometimes we're at the right moment and we're the right person.
So a question here, for people may not know this, but there's the P ratio of how likely the growth of generative AI, and if we get to, a general AI or super intelligent AI, there are people who are saying that the launch and the, let's say, unleashing AI, that at a certain point that it could destroy humanity, or at least lead to a radical negative effect. And some people talk about P ratio. There's that book, which I actually didn't love, If We Build It, Everyone's Gonna Die. I forgot the author. Is like,
Yeah.
I did not like it that much. And there's other people who say, AI, Sam Altman or others, and part of it's just PR, that AI is going to lead to the age of abundance and the end of disease. And so just for, I mean, some people watching this or listening in the future might understand this, but how would you summarize the doomsayers versus the AI cheerleaders, and where do you position yourself, or what kind of data or facts do you like to draw on?
Yeah, so this escalated quickly, from discussing about education and studies to P-Doom scenarios. But as you know, based on our AGI course conversations, I definitely I'm fascinated by this topic, and I'm proud to say, and it's still work in progress. It's not like I've already passed the finish line, that I'm positioning myself in the middle. So I've drank the Kool-Aid of a big tech company that is leading this race of how powerful and for good AI can be if we deploy it wisely and with the focus on augmentation and having humans both in the development side, but also being trained to use it and to be able to sort of co-deploy it with the humans, with the workers or people who are going to be impacted by AI. But at the same time, I work in civil society. I work in a nonprofit working with vulnerable people that we're reskilling and placing into jobs. AI is already a disruptor that is unfortunately putting more risk on people who already have been given by life not the best of hands. So it's always the case, be it with the COVID, so or now with AI, that the most vulnerable are the ones who are going to be impacted the most and first. And we see this happening now already. But I try to be, as I said, in the middle. I remain a tech optimist. I'm fascinated and fully supportive of the message I've been, I guess, sharing all along this conversation of use these tools. It's not AI who has agency, at least not yet, to take over your job or livelihood. It's a colleague who's using it who might be preferred for a promotion or to be kept on the job whenever we're going to have the next market correction or recession. So we still have agency, and we have not to forget this point because it's very important, regardless of what you hear in the media or what the tech executive says or what the book title says. We still AI is not doesn't have a life of its own yet. There's always this key sort of asterisk with yet, because we don't know where we're going to be in I would say 3 to 5 years. But for now, we still have agency. However, in order to reduce the chances of the doomsday scenario to happen, which I think for now there's small chances of that happening, but still there are chances, and even if it's 1%, I think we should give more notice. I think if I am to give the statistics that I think are the average of expert economists, techies, but also just people in the policy space, it's probably between 10 and 50% that there might be a doomsday scenario in the next 5 to 10 years. With such high percentages, I think we should do much more as a society to make sure AI is aligned. Again, to make sure AI is used for augmentation, not automation, or at least the balance to be a bit better. and to make sure there's all the safety nets in place for the people who will, even if there's no doomsday scenario, will fall through the cracks as AI is disrupting more professions and more sectors. So we definitely have, as a society, a lot more work to do to make sure those 10-15% chances are decreasing to, if not 0, 1% in the coming 3 to 5 years, because I think that's realistically the timeline we should use, because everything beyond the end of the decade is very hard to not predict, because anything is hard to predict with accuracy, but it's very hard even to envisage. So I work with 3 to 5 years. So my goals are for myself and for the work I do, how can I provide awareness to this topic and train people in using AI and do the best I can between now and the end of the decade. Beyond that, let's see how we have to reposition.
Okay. So another question. So I have a friend, I won't go into too much detail, who ran innovation for a call center somewhere in the world. I won't say where. They lost their job. And I keep seeing, with the angel investing I do, I keep seeing AI agents and, all sorts of interesting things. And I would say, and my wife and I there's a series we're watching about Colombia on Netflix, and there's a lot of typewriters. Like I took typing in high school, and it was one of the best classes I ever took. Almost no one uses typewriters anymore. I mean, if you go downtown Medellin to the government centers, like 2 or 3 people helping fill out forms. But even so, he lost his job. And it's part of it is automation, and part of it is the pursuit of capital over humanity. And a lot of these AI companies, not all of them, particularly because of the financial structures, and there's also national security interests. OpenAI, who knows if it'll be profitable? Perplexity, maybe Claude is a little bit closer, but like, how do you balance public interest or regulation with this need to produce huge capital returns? And how do you see that, just in the AI race? Or can we have AI that is regulated and beneficial outweigh the pursuit of commercial? I mean, when OpenAI, they're launching, I forgot what, like their erotic chatbot or just things like that, that is not benefiting humanity. That's purely a commercial motive. So just how do you see that tension between capital accumulation and kind of public good?
Yeah, I mean, I know we're towards the end of the conversation. I don't want to put the vibes down for anybody listening, but I think my views on this, and they are that unfortunately humanity historically has not been great to change, even if the change is needed and it seems clear why. And in this case, to rethink maybe our whole capitalistic system, or at least for when it comes to or pertaining the tech companies developing the technology, to make sure from a policy and governance perspective that they're being pushed, if not, if nudging is not sufficient, to make sure they allocate more of their compute power for safety research, for instance, which is such a no-brainer solution that could be implemented fairly quickly, but that's not being done. And why is it not being done? It's because of this race paradigm we're in, which is, I think, very dangerous. And it's why I think at the end of the day, OpenAI has opened AI, but before its time, in my view. I worked at Google, so I'm biased here in this sense, because I know Google has been working on it for much longer. The original paper, Attention is All You Need, that is behind the technology, the GPT, has been written by former Google researchers. Google, for both business reasons and PR reasons and policy reasons and many other reasons probably, has not launched anything similar to ChatGPT before ChatGPT was launched, until the technology was there and they were sure that it's safe enough. And that's why Timis and his team's work has been mostly focused on how do you apply AI in science and in sectors that you can only see the good, or definitely if it's deployed as they've deployed so far, only for sort of positive reasons and for the betterment of humanity. As soon as ChatGPT was launched, we didn't know at the time, we started the race that is not just between companies, between the two continents like US and Chinese companies, but also between governments. And until we stop this race, and that's where my fear comes, that I think the race could only be stopped when there's some sort of calamity happening, be it or benign one, some sort of a cyber attack that doesn't necessarily hurt people physically, but maybe takes down sort of the energy system for a few hours in a country, that could still obviously cause a lot of havoc, but it's not maybe the equivalent of an atomic bomb. But until something really massive enough happens that people on both sides of the aisle, so the US and China, the governments in particular, wake up and sit at the same table to share knowledge to share how many chips they have, what sort of a level of development they're in, like they've done previously after the two bombs were dropped in Japan, nuclear bombs. Until we have such a moment, I don't see any change, because we're in a race that it seems like it's being both positioned by the U.S. government and the Chinese one, the two governments and countries which are by far in the lead, as a zero-sum game. It's only one of us can win through either our own efforts as a government or for the companies that we sort of host. So yeah, I don't have a better answer other than I fear until something happens, people will not wake up to this reality that as things are now in a zero-sum AI race, the chances for us to reduce that 10-15% chance of a doomsday scenario are not decreasing, but increasing potentially in the coming years
Okay.
until something changes. So I wish I had a better
Right.
answer or a more positive one, but that's how things are at the moment, I'm afraid.
So I had a friend years ago who worked for the Pugwash conferences, which did a lot of science diplomacy between Soviet and U.S. scientists. And there's a global, lots of global organizations around AI safety, but obviously we need more investment but I haven't seen the Pugwash equivalent of the AI. So three quick questions, maybe like 30-second answer each. So generation, what is the focus of the organization? You mentioned some, and how do people engage, or what type of people do you hire that.
Sure. So with Generation, we are an employment nonprofit active in 17 countries on 5 continents, and our focus is to train and place vulnerable people into meaningful, sustainable jobs in primarily three key sectors. One being by far our biggest sector, tech, where we place the most people, followed by the green economy. So, jobs such as bike repair specialist, or solar panel installer, or wind turbine technician, to name a few. And last but not least of the top three sectors is healthcare, with professions such as elderly care assistant or nurse. So these are some of the professions. We also have customer service and sales, and also even construction work in countries where this profession is in high demand. And again, our focus is to provide both the skills necessary, technical and behavioral and mindset skills to a person who we prepare, or a learner as we call the people we help, but also to help them beyond just learning these skills and maybe getting a certificate at the end if there's a connection to the things they're studying with the particular certificate, but very importantly to connect them with an employer. For us, that's the key. We're end to end. We find the people who need our help, we train them, we connect them with an employer, and we stay with them whilst they're in the job to mentor them. So yeah, we really try to make sure everybody has a meaningful job, and that's our vision for the world.
Okay, so please check out Generation. The second question is, obviously you've talked about your LinkedIn profile, and you've talked about services. One is just expertise, but also mentoring and also career coaching. So just if you had to summarize, kind of if people wanted to, one, follow you, is LinkedIn the best channel or website or newsletter? And then what kind of, obviously you're a busy person, but what kind of services do you offer, like a little bit of self-promotion, whether it's a conference speaker or trainer?
Sure. So one thing that I offer as an individual is definitely conference speaker. So I've been speaking, as I like to say, before it was cool, about the impact of AI on work. There's TED Talks that I delivered going back to 2018 or 2019 on this topic. How have my views changed? Interesting. That's a topic for another podcast, because they have changed to some degree given the latest developments, but not to all degrees. Definitely not in terms of what skills will be important, which I still think are the same set of digital/AI skills with people skills and a few other behavioral traits. I'm also a trainer in prompt engineering. So I train people on how to use AI tools both efficiently, but also ethically and responsibly. And I do this for corporates, for think tanks, for academics, nonprofits, and even politicians. So as long as you want to learn how to use any of these key tools, be it ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, Perplexity, you name it, I can help your organization learn how to use this tool. And yeah, as of next week, I will also be an AGI strategy course facilitator. I'm very happy that I'll be able to put into practice what we've both learned together, and also to create this conversation, this a safe space for conversations on AGI, which I do in Brussels with a group of tech experts and enthusiasts, which we meet in Brussels. So if you are in Brussels also and interested, we meet on a monthly basis under the umbrella of the Brussels AGI Collective to discuss artificial general intelligence and its impact on society in a safe space and to just share views. And I'll do this. Obviously, I'll bring these discussions to the online forum with this AGI course, and I do this on LinkedIn. So for those who are not in the course or not in Brussels, I'm posting every other day on LinkedIn something that I still draft myself with the help of AI to cosmetize it and make it look maybe even better for all the algorithms. But it's still my own weekly research on AI and its impact on work, workers, and society. So tune in if you want to find out more.
Yeah, and as we started off, Blue Dot, I facilitated AI governance, and both, you can apply to be a facilitator. They get, probably 30 times as many applicants, but also students. So if you're looking to upskill, and then I did a course as a student. No, I was a facilitator this summer for European network and AI safety. So there's a lot of places doing this. Last question, particularly around workforce development. What are your favorite places? Podcasts, newsletters, just so the workforce development, the places you go to kind of be inspired and challenged that you might encourage others to check out.
I know I have a flexible working schedule which allows me to do this, and also I do a lot of reading in the weekend, so I consume probably more content than anybody that I know of personally. To be honest, so there's so many. I think I will almost have to send you a follow up email just with this, but the ones I can definitely quote on the AI space is the exponential view of Azim Azar, which is a great resource for keeping up with what's happening in the space. Ethan Mollick, the author of Co-Intelligence, professor at Wharton, he also has a great newsletter on the topic. Benedict Evans, a tech analyst, I think UK-based, also with his eponymous Benedict Evans newsletter. I recently discovered another one on AI called D-Transformer, which is great. The AI Economics Brief of the Windfall Trust, which is in its third edition, which is also very good, and that I'm subscribed to. There's just so many, and I watch on YouTube. I mean, even now you'll not be able to see my screen, but I have, I think, 5 or 6 different podcasts opened on YouTube that I will listen, if not later today, in the weekend. So for everybody or anybody who would like to learn more where to get the right information, because there's a sea of stuff, but a lot of it's not, I think, quality. I could recommend you some really quality sources, given that I've been in this space for all these years, and I've learned how to filter sort of the gold nuggets from the things that are maybe just sort of the weed coming out after just 2 years of ChatGPT. Everybody's a AI podcaster or a blogger in this topic, and those expertises are developed over much more years. So.
So please follow David on LinkedIn, Generation PCM. We launched about a year ago an AI for Impact newsletter, and I remember when I lived in Europe and I came back and I had used email. I'd never used the internet, and it was like 1995. I moved back, and I was like, oh my gosh, the age of information, and now it's the age of slop, and curation is more like curation. Yes, you can get anything, but it's curation, whether it's your own or from others. So thank you so much, David.
Context setting. I didn't mention it for that. How to set the right context, both in your day-to-day interactions with your team, but also with AI agents. It's all about prompting them to set the right context to get the most out of them. So curation and context setting, these are 2 skills to keep in mind.
Although no matter how much I context set with AI, because I built out a lot of customized tools, they still don't behave always the way I want. But thank you so much for your time, energy. And again, this will be live as an audio podcast. Please think about rating the podcast, follow David PCDN Generation, and it's certainly an interesting time in the world. Any last comment before we finish?
It's an interesting time, but I was also, as I said, I would want to leave it on a positive note. We still have agency as humans. We still can voice our concerns. If that's still, I think, if it's the only thing we can do, it's still more valuable than not doing anything. And if we build the collective voice in raising both concerns when it comes to AI and how we as consumers and citizens want it to be deployed, I think we should definitely not forget that we have a collective power and still have agency to change course if needed on how AI is being developed and deployed. So don't forget you have agency. Use the time over the holidays to regroup and reflect. And let's have a great start of the new year with renowned energies and more focused work and collective work on this really, really important topic.
Okay, thank you. And all the resources we mentioned will be in the show notes. So thank you so much, David. Have a great afternoon.